Welcome to the Endurance Drive podcast.
Our mission is to share the key principles that structure our approach to endurance training and coaching.
I'm Jim.
And I'm Katie.
Hello, Katie. How are you?
I am pretty good, Jim, and I am a little bit nervous and a little bit excited because this is an unprecedented episode. I think maybe a third or more of our content is dedicated to swimming, of all things. So it's just going to be so crazy today.
This is going to be a great episode or a terrible episode. If you don't like to swim, then just turn us off now. Go listen to music or something else, right? So, but right, we're going to talk a lot about swimming, but also it's springtime, right? Like the first day of spring's coming here, and I feel like we've just gone from like base period to race period. I feel like there's like been almost no transition. So today we're going to talk about tapering, right? We're going to talk about swimming. We're going to talk about zone 2 running, how to make that more tolerable. What else are we going to talk about today?
Yeah, no, this is great stuff. We've also got some things related to race sims. A lot of people are doing race sims right now. And then finally, we'll talk about the ways that the seasons are evolving now that a lot of people are moving into this build period. So talking about the idea of an easier week, bigger weekend, etc. And then if we have time, we might talk a little bit about how we kind of onboard people and start with new athletes, all the information that we need to know as coaches.
We have a lot of content. We're not really sure how much we're going to cover. And I thanked Katie for recording now because she just said to me, she texted me and said, "Hey, do you want to record 2 hours earlier?" I'm like, "Of course I want to record 2 hours earlier because I've been working on plans all day long. And I needed a distraction." So thanks for coming in early here.
Oh, no, this is great for me, too. I'm procrastinating my Zwift ride, which I don't really want to do, but it's a nice day and I'm stuck in the city in Boston. So I'm like, well, I might as well do it when it's dark out. Like, that will make me feel better about the fact that I'm on Zwift.
Perfect. Okay, let's go. Where do we want to start?
Yeah, so I think maybe a good place to start is this big question about tapering, because some of our athletes are actually starting to taper, which seems crazy because it feels like a week ago we were like, this is the beginning of the season. But I do have a handful of athletes that are doing races in April. So we've got 70.3 Oceanside is coming up very soon. That's sort of the season kickoff. I've got a couple of marathoners that are racing in April. So Boston is coming up, as well as a couple sort of qualifying races for that. So I think I'll get us started by just posing the question of what is a taper if you've never tapered before. Jim, tell us what a taper is.
Oh gosh, what is a taper? A taper is when you get really angry and outraged at everybody around you and you get super angry, and then hopefully you show up at the race and do awesome. Is that what a taper is? It's a rage, right?
Yes,
yeah.
It's total rage. That was a perfect description. But in terms of training volume, maybe we could talk a little bit about what that entails. The taper is all about reducing volume leading up into your race. So I think you and I are probably pretty aligned, Jim, on that we do like a 2 to 3 week taper. Sometimes for Ironman athletes, it can be up to 4 weeks. So you're really starting to ramp down after that final week 4 race sim. But the reason that it's important is because, we talk about how training at a high level, you have a ton of accumulated fatigue in your body. You have so much fatigue that you can't even feel it. You're probably just this like low to moderate level of tired all of the time. And then you have to shed that fatigue in order to really be able to express your true fitness on race day. And sometimes I think people are a little bit scared of doing that just because we haven't done it as much during the season. But if anyone's had the experience of sort of accidentally tapering in the context of their season, we've talked about getting sick, we've talked about going on vacation, you know that there are major performance benefits to be had if you can get some good rest in. So the way that we think about tapering is, as we reduce volume, we're not always reducing intensity at the same time because we want to stay sharp. So if we were to say like, okay, stay on the couch for 3 weeks before your A race, you would not actually feel that good when your A race came around. But we need to figure out how to dig you out of that hole of fatigue. So think about if you're normally doing these long rides on the trainer that are 3 hours long for your 7.3, well, maybe 3 weeks out, you're going to do something that's more like 2.5 hours. Then 2 weeks out, you might do an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes. The week out, you might just be riding for an hour, but each of those are going to have some good half Ironman power in them. So you are tapping into what race feels like, or that race effort feels like. And then similarly, we can taper down run mileage for our marathoners. For example, you might peak at a 20-mile run, and then you might run 16, then 8 or something like that before your race. And we're going to bring down kind of that swim volume and that bike volume. So get rid of anything that's sort of junk miles or base. Again, we're not just going to have you do threshold, but if it's like we can condense the work into 45 minutes instead of 2 hours, that's exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah, and one of the great things about TrainingPeaks, I was thinking here, is like, we use this thing called the TSB, Training Stress Balance, and it turns out we try to get people like around like plus 20, plus 30 for big races, and actually those numbers tend to work out pretty well for us. So if you're self-coached, that's something you can look at.
And keep in mind that the only way to get that number to be plus 20 is to actually let the fitness stuff come down a little bit. But I don't want you to think that you're getting less fit. That's where the numbers are a little bit misleading, where you're like, oh, but my fitness number isn't going to be as high as it was maybe 4 weeks ago, but your fatigue number is also not going to be as high. So think about like you're going to build that fitness and then bring it down to the point where you feel really awesome. Don't lean too hard into that, but I agree with you that TSB can be a pretty good indicator. And mostly during a training plan, your TSB is going to be in the negatives, like at the end of every single week, unless it's like a recovery week, but it does take some dedicated recovery to get it up into the positives.
And just go back to your point about we raise up the intensity during taper. And I was just doing some Olympic distance race bricks and some tapers and also our half Ironman ones. And there's some really beefy things in there. So, week 2 out from the race, week 1 out from the race, there's some pretty hard stuff on the weekend. So it's not like you're losing, yes, we're shedding fatigue, but we're actually really challenging you as well. And there's some hard stuff to be done in those last 3 weeks when you're, quote, tapering. So I always tell people like, yes, we're tapering. We're going to be losing some fatigue, but you're going to get challenged during this time as well too. So you will still be in that race mindset, but we're just trying to do it in smaller chunks, but very challenging chunks as well.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. And I think the one thing that sort of falls apart is like if you're doing Ironman, for instance, that's where we're never really doing anything super high intensity to begin with. So volume's going to come down, down, down. But especially for those longer distance athletes, I do tend to see as a coach a lot of anxiety around the taper. And I certainly have experienced this as well, kind of in the beginning of not really wanting to lean into the taper because it's so different from what you've been doing. And I think a lot of that comes back to the idea that once you are officially tapering, you kind of say like the hay is in the barn and you've basically stacked all of the fitness that you're going to have for race day. Now, don't be one of those people. We've talked about it before. There's like the Ironman like Placid Facebook group where people are like, oh yeah, I'm doing my biggest ride. I'm going to ride 150 miles 1 week out from the race. And you're like, that is not the thing to do. Like, don't be one of those people and don't try to like shovel hay into the barn a week before this event. Instead, you just have to like pause maybe 2 weeks out and be like, okay, the hay is here. We cannot get any more hay. We're just going to protect the current hay and we're going to sharpen the hay, if you want to take the metaphor all the way there. And that comes from, again, these shorter sessions, lower volume, and a little bit of high intensity.
Yeah, the farmer me says we're going to dry that hay in the barn. So that's what's going to happen. But
I love it. The dry the hay. Oh my gosh.
But back to that Facebook thing, I always find that those messages always like, I'm going to go out and ride, 100 miles. Who else is going to Lake Placid the weekend before? I'm going to ride my big ride. Who else is going? And they always like pose like, who's coming with me? Like, no, hopefully nobody's going with you.
I mean, as someone who's very introverted in the training department, I'm like, that sounds like the worst thing you could ever do for so many reasons. You like have to hang out with a stranger. You're riding 150 miles before you're an Ironman. It sounds absolutely brutal, but I guess to each their own. If it works for you as an extrovert, enjoy it.
Exactly. All right. I think we've covered taper. What else is next here?
Well, I do have 2 more points on this, actually.
Oh, okay.
2 little things here, very
Yes.
important.
Okay.
What to expect when you're tapering. It's like
Mhm.
what to expect when you're expecting to taper.
Yes.
So
That's a book, right? Yeah.
this is my new book dropping in 2026.
Yeah.
But anyway, sometimes your body is going to feel weird. So I've had the experience before as an athlete, and then many coaches are like, oh my God, I have a brand new niggle. I have a calf injury. My big toe hurts, whatever it is. I find that this is not usually a real injury. Like, yes, we can be careful of it. Yes, you can go check in with your PT if you want to, but often it's just your body kind of adjusting to a new normal. So I wouldn't get too stressed about it. I think sometimes some of it can even be like a little bit of a mental thing feeding into what's going on. So be aware of that. We talked about this before, but there is rage. You will probably be grouchy. Be prepared for that and warn your support network that they might want to have a wide berth around you at this time. We've talked about the padded rim for tapering athletes prior to Ironman races. And just know that all those feelings are very much part of the process. It will go away. The niggles will go away. The body feeling weird will go away. As soon as you start the race, you just have to actually get to that point.
Yeah, the niggles thing is interesting because I bet more than 50% of my athletes always say it the last couple weeks, like, oh, I got something in my calf. I got something here. I really feel something. You're like, I don't know. You just had 9 months of really good training. You don't want to gaslight people because obviously an injury could be serious, right? But so many times, be like, oh, I can feel something about 2 inches from the top of my Achilles. I've got a little spot. You're like, yeah, it's called taper.
Exactly. And given that this is going to be hard on you potentially mentally, so we just have a couple of tips to close with that can kind of help you get through this process. I would say since you're not spending as much time in terms of volume on training, you can spend extra time on all the other stuff that you probably neglect during your season. So mental prep, we've talked about our mental skills worksheet, journaling, whatever that is. Do more rolling, do more mobility, get your gear organized, sleep a lot. If you've been a little bit skirting by on 7 hours of sleep, turn that into 8 hours of sleep. do good meal prep, just all the things that are harder to get when you're really, really busy. And I think that can actually allow you to devote the same amount of time in the day to your broader endurance escapades, but it's not the exact same time of like volume. You're actually letting your body recover.
Yeah, a couple of things I like to do is I love to make a list because when I make a list, it always seems like the stress goes away. So we're both very big list people. The other thing I like to do is I like to read the athlete guide, and I like to read the athlete guide like a week or so in advance because I just feel like there's things that maybe I need to pick up or maybe little pieces of gear. Anyway, there's something. But I always read the athlete guide. That helps me, and it helps me visualize the race as well too. And so the other thing too is make a race day schedule. Again, you have time. So, or maybe even make a schedule of 1 day out, 2 days out from the race and say, okay, this is the time I'm checking in on, say the race is on Saturday. Okay, Friday afternoon, we're driving there. At 2 o'clock, I am checking in. At 4 o'clock, we're going to the hotel, whatever it is, right? But just sort of plan your entire day out. And then all you have to do is just hit the play button when it gets to within, like, say, 24 hours or 36 hours of your race. You just say, oh, I look at my schedule. I just play the schedule. Off I go.
I love it. And one other thing that we'll mention here is that if you are really right before your race when this airs, we have episodes that are on best practices for race week and best practices for kind of day before race day. So we're going to link both of those in the show notes. That kind of blends into this whole discussion on tapering, on making lists. You will be ready. And yeah, just a huge good luck to all of our athletes. This is really, really exciting.
It's super exciting. Like I say, it's just so weird because I feel like it was base, winter, and all of a sudden you look up and like, oh my God, we got races. They're happening now. It's incredible.
Yeah.
So yeah, good luck to everybody. People, you're so prepared. I'm so impressed with all of our athletes this year, and just everybody's trying their best, right? It's been a tough winter across the board for a lot of different reasons, and I'm just super proud of all of our athletes who just putting their best foot forward like every day.
Yeah, totally. And I think that actually leads us right into this other insight that I had, which is related to races and race sims more broadly. So some people are not exactly at their race yet. Maybe they have a race in May or June, it's coming up, but we've started race sims. So if you're new to the podcast, something that's big about the training that we program for our athletes is, 4 weeks out, 8 weeks out, 12 weeks out from a race. Usually we will have people do kind of a race simulation. So for a half Ironman, for example, you're going to take the distance of a half Ironman, you're going to spread it across 2-ish days or do distances that are kind of adjacent to half Ironman distance, practice swimming, then biking, then running in that order with some race pace type stuff. And the great thing about that is that you get a feel for what it'll actually be like on race day, so there are no surprises. I will say that early in the season, especially because a lot of athletes are stuck inside doing, say, like a week 12 race sim, it can be kind of brutal. It's pretty tough to do, 6 by 15 minutes at half Ironman effort on your trainer, and then to go outside and it's 25 degrees and it's sleeting or whatever it is, and you're trying to run race pace. So I've probably had a mixed bag of results in my athletes kind of just starting out their race sims. And I get these comments that are along the lines of like, well, this didn't go that well, probably because of X, Y, and Z. I think that when this happens, I usually try to nudge athletes in the direction of a mindset shift, which is like, great, I'm so glad that this had adversity and didn't go well, because you probably learned a ton of things about what we can change for next time so things go better. And this is, again, why we get like 2 to 4 race sims in before a longer race so that we can troubleshoot as many possible issues as we can. So things like, okay, my nutrition was a disaster. Like I had GI issues the entire run. It felt terrible. Well, then we need to change something on hydration, on nutrition, on what you ate that day, on what you ate before. We can kind of drill into all those things. Maybe it was that the paces were not right. Like your FTP was too low or too high in Zwift, and therefore it felt really hard. All these things we can change. And I would say just from doing this for a long time, it is very common that we see athletes have this progression where race sims didn't go that well, or at least one of the race sims was pretty tough, and then the race actually went great. So just because you have a race sim, don't think that it means you're going to have a bad race. It might actually just mean that you're getting all of that out of your system early. That being said, if you have a great race sim, it doesn't mean you're going to have a bad race. It just meant, okay, great, we're going to document where it worked really, really well so that we can replicate it when it's time to show up on the starting line.
Yeah, there's a trend with our newer athletes. It seems like week 12 and week 8 race sims just don't go that well. And again, I'm saying the same thing. I'm like, great, it didn't go well. That's awesome. Like, look how much we learned. This is incredible, right? And a lot of times it is around nutrition. A lot of times, but usually by week 4, like people have nailed it. And then whether you're being coached by us or you're coaching yourself individually, like this whole race sims, again, we say there's no magic workouts, but I really feel like the race sims they work out so many details, and you show up and you are race ready on race day if you do at least 3 race sims.
Yeah, and it's funny. I had a call with an athlete right before this, and she was asking about kind of paces for her race coming up in probably about 7 weeks. And I was like, honestly, we're not sure yet. We have to wait until we get the upcoming race sim in and the next one after that. And then we're going to have a really, really good idea because it is only when you put all the variables together, you get the swim in before you hop on your bike, you get on the bike outside, you go for a run, the weather's kind of like it is on race day that we can really, really say with certainty, like this is a reasonable pace to think about. Until then, you just have to trust the process, which is really, really hard to do, but just do the training, like look at heart rate, things like that, think about feel, and then the paces will definitely come.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've talked about this a lot. I have a lot of athletes who say, "Okay, what is my pace I'm aiming for the run?" And I'm like, "Well, just like you said, like we gotta put the swim in first, and that's gonna take a lot out of you. And then we're gonna do this bike thing, and we have to figure out the people will say, well, what's my percentage of FTP? And I'm like, well, we train for 85%, but it could be 70%, it could be 75% because you just did a big swim, right? And again, your run pace may be slower than you thought, maybe faster than you thought. So like you say, you have to go through those race sims. And I'm always asking athletes, what do you feel is sustainable, like for both for the bike and for the run? So regardless of like what percent of FTP or what the numbers, what a calculator may say, it all comes down to like, how do you feel? Is this sustainable for 56 miles on the bike and 13 miles on the run?
Exactly. Love it. All right, Jim, I'm going to popcorn to you. I want to hear this insight about kind of how training plans are progressing as we get into this build phase with the easier week and the big weekend. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, this fits in well, right? So going through and we're seeing lots of big weekend bricks and just like the bike volume's getting bigger, the run volume's getting bigger. Some of these bricks are pretty hard on the weekend. So I'm always reminding my athletes like, during base, it feel like it's, Monday through Sunday, I wouldn't say there's still a difference. Usually there's more work generally on the weekends, but it tends to be more sort of even keeled. And when we get more into the specific period and getting race ready, there's bigger weekends. And so I always remind people like Monday through Friday, look ahead in your schedule and say, okay, I know I got a big weekend coming up. So for example, on Tuesday, I've got a run. It's 4 by 2 minutes at 10K pace. And you may say, okay, you know what? It's a busy week. My LSS is high. Maybe you do, 2 by 2 or 3 by 2, right? But look ahead. And we talked about this is having these adaptive workouts. Like adapt the workout Monday through Friday so that you show up on Saturday with energy and just, enthusiasm to do the work on the weekend. So I feel like now, like during Monday through Friday, it is keep moving, do the intention of the workout, but don't always feel like you have to follow everything to the T Monday through Friday, but then be ready on Saturday and Sunday to really work.
Yeah, and I think the ability to evaluate your week and then figure out what the big rock is, it does change a lot from the base period to the build period. Because in the base period, I think it's just a bunch of medium-sized rocks or bricks that you're just like stacking the wall over and over again. And there, like the consistency is so important of just like, okay, get the stuff in, get the stuff in. But then once we get into these like really crucial weeks, you're like, it is so important to get the long run in, for example, for your marathon prep, or to get the long ride in for your Ironman prep, that if you have to skip 3 workouts in order to make that happen, I actually would like push athletes to do that. And it's interesting. I had an athlete recently who has a marathon coming up, and she had a little bit of a calf niggle going on, or maybe a shin niggle. And she was like, yeah, I don't know if I should do my speed workout. And I was like, cut it. We're not doing the speed workout because the big rock this week is your one and only opportunity to run 20 miles. And I would much rather have you get that long run in than kind of like get through some other workouts, but then it turns into a 10-mile long run and then we don't have that bang for your marathon prep. So think about that in lots of different contexts. If you have to make modifications, just protect that special day where you're really, really getting the huge stimulus in, because that will help you the most for kind of the longer efforts.
Yeah, well said. Thank you for and yeah, like you say, like skip workouts. I mean, like there's, again, looking ahead, I was doing a bunch of Olympic plans before we jump on this, and I was like, wow, these weeks they're kind of beefy, and there's a lot of speed work and stuff. And I would just as soon have people skip, a Tuesday run or a Thursday run, take the day off because then we'll show up on the weekend and just crush my brick. And so if you need to do that, yeah, go for it.
Love it. All right. So next insight here, I think we're going to do the swim ones after. So if you listen to us for non-swimming, you hopefully are still holding on to the podcast where we're going to talk about zone 2, which is one of the most popular topics on our podcast. And it's funny, I thought it would be useful to kind of revamp zone 2 because now anytime I get a new athlete, I direct them to episode 2 of the podcast where we talk all about zone 2 training. And I'm like, I don't even know what we said in that. Like, hopefully it was good. It was a 30-minute episode. We were not confident at all. We were brand new. So anyway, I want to revamp some things that I'm thinking about with zone 2. And we could probably do a full deep dive on this. But a sentiment that I've seen in a lot of new athletes recently is, as we know, frustration with having to stare at your watch during workouts to make sure that you're in zone 2. So it's like, oh my gosh, I hit 160 going up a hill and then I was out of zone 2 and now I'm upset and my pace was slow, etc. Based on that, I've, as a coach, moved into a lot more sort of feel-based cues and actually suggested that athletes take a break from focusing exclusively on staring at the watch. So, a couple of those cues that I think about: number one, your rate of perceived exertion. That's like a 1 to 10 scale, where 10 is like all out hard sprinting. 1 is like you're barely doing anything, take a nice walk. I usually think it's like a 3 or 4 out of 10 for easy zone 2 run in. Another way to think about it is the talk test. We've talked about this before. So, could you hold a conversation while you're running? And a conversation is not just like barking out a couple words to someone like, hey, like it's hard. It's like, no, I could be conversational with someone else. Again, you can actually do this with a friend or by yourself. You could talk a little bit, you could sing a little bit. Bonus points if you could actually sing a song as you're running. And another one here is nose breathing. So, could you breathe in and out of your nose? Could you keep your mouth closed while you're out there? If you can do those things, you are probably in zone 2, and you can do that without having to stare at your watch. So I'll tell people like, hey, try out these different sort of feel-based cues. Don't look at your heart rate, and then just see what it is after. And if you thought that you were nose breathing, but then your average heart rate was 175, like then we'll have a conversation about it. But usually I think these cues are pretty helpful.
Yeah, I totally agree. And something I know I've been doing a lot is I've just been taking walk breaks in my zone too. And maybe I'll run a couple miles and just in warm up, and then maybe I'll say, well, I want to run a bit faster, but I'll take a walk break, and I could stop my watch. And I was like, I want to go walk a little bit, which has been great. Or what I'll do is I'll warm up, and then I'll stop my watch before I do like my pickups and strides. So that's totally legit. Like just stop for a little bit, look around, take some breaths, get your heart rate down. Today I did my pickups, and after the end of my pickups, I stopped my watch again. I think I stopped my watch 3 or 4 times today. I was like, I don't care. Like, this is a zone 2 with pickups, but I'm going to keep stopping my watch because I just want to catch my breath and enjoy the day. So that's totally legit as well too. And this reminds me of my challenge of the week is this sounds and smell run. So stick around for that.
Yeah. And then a couple other hacks that you can think about here too are like, if hills are tough, you live in a hilly area, go to a track, try running on a track, and then you can keep things really, really consistent. Or even just like a treadmill can sometimes help because there is this more controlled environment. I did want to close this section with actually just talking a little bit about hacks sort of for getting your heart rate lower, because I think there are a lot of things that we do that can actually jack up our heart rate more than just the stimulus of trying to run or bike or whatever it is. One is that I would just be careful of caffeine intake prior to a run. Caffeine is going to elevate your heart rate. So if you're someone who's pounding a double shot of espresso and then like running out the door to your run, we hope you're not doing that anyway, just because of other reasons. But in general, I think that can do something that really elevates heart rate. And in my experience, if I go out for a run in the afternoon when it's been like 8 hours since I've had coffee, my heart rate usually is considerably lower than if I go for a morning run. And I think part of that could be caffeine. So something to try. Avoid fasted training. We've talked about that before, but like eat something before you go, because otherwise your body starts to freak out. Cortisol goes up, heart rate is high because we're like, what is going on? We're in starvation mode. So that's a big one. Even just like taking a gel as you run at the door could be a good call. We preach run warm-ups and activation all the time. This is another way to sort of gradually elevate your heart rate, especially if you've been lying down or sitting or whatever it is for the entire day. So we recommend things like there's a lunge matrix that we'll link in the show notes, pre-run glute activation, RPR, run dynamics, all of that, or even just a 5-minute walk. That is the easiest warm-up that you could possibly do, but gradually kind of transition into it. And then 2 other minor things, like bringing intentionality to your breathing, I think is helpful. Sometimes I'll do this on the trainer, where if I feel like my heart rate's elevated, I'll actually look at it and just say, I'm going to bring it down right now. I'm going to take some deep breaths. Again, a little bit harder to do that sometimes when you're outside or riding outside. But I would say you can try that out, just trying to like really fill up those lungs with a big exhale. And then finally, get those stress levels under control. Much easier said than done. It's not often a matter of just saying, well, don't be so stressed out. But when you feel like LSS is really, really high, that's going to have an impact on heart rate. So bring in all the things that you can for self-care, I think can be really, really helpful for keeping heart rate down.
There's that Bernie Sanders meme that's always like, once again, I ask you to, and right. And I always say that with run warm-ups. I was thinking about today, I went for my run today, but I had a great run today. But the reason why I had a great run today is because I actually did a proper run warm-up. And I did a few things that I like to do, and I finished it with the RPR, and I just had a great run. And I kept thinking this run, like, well, when I do warm up, I can't like 15 seconds more per mile. But it's so much more fun. It's more enjoyable, and I'm getting a better stimulus. And I'm thinking like, God, I leave so much money on the table when I don't do a run warm up.
I love that. Once again, I am asking you to do a run warm-up. I'm just going to drop that in all my athletes' training peaks.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Listeners, please email us the Bernie Sanders meme. We'd really appreciate it.
And I really like your possibility of filling up your lungs. I love that. What I'll do usually during the first mile of my run is I will actually try to like do some belly breathing and I'll actually physically put my hand on my belly and just say, hey, can you fill up your lungs and expand out your belly? So I'm really working on that. Enjoying my first mile, my warm up mile.
Awesome. All right. Well, we've dodged it so far, but I think it is time, Jim, to talk about swimming. Maybe some people are celebrating. I personally am not. I intend to black out for this entire section of the podcast. But I have some thoughts on common swim technique issues that we see and how to fix them. And I'm sure we both have a lot to say about many of these things. But, we both coach a good amount of in-person swim lessons. So first thing that I wanted to bring up here is the idea of crossover. So crossover happens. And again, I'm going to caveat all of this by saying that it's very hard to describe swim issues, but I'm going to try to do it. So crossover, when you go to take your swim stroke, you want your hands to be sort of like train tracks, your arms to be on these parallel train tracks. Crossover happens when, say, your right arm crosses way over your face onto the left side, or vice versa, your left arm crosses way over to the right. And it makes the whole rest of your stroke kind of funky. It just doesn't exactly look right. It can be very jerky, and it's not that efficient. So whenever we see crossover, we tell people, okay, use the lane line, stare at that lane line on the bottom of the pool, and keep your hands on either side, just like train tracks, and then pull along the edge of it. And that can help a lot with crossover.
Yeah, and a cousin of that is people entering, and then they typically will move their hands to the outside as well too. So they'll enter in line with their shoulder, but then they'll move their hand horizontally out, say either to the left or to the right. And the way I like to tell people is that if you were, say for example, like starting a chainsaw or a lawnmower, you typically tend to have, or you're getting out of the pool, like your hands are much closer to your body. So you always have the most power when your hand is closer to your body. You don't try to start a chainsaw with your hand way, way out in front of you. You really put your hand really close to your body and really use your hip and your shoulders to pull through. So think about that. Train tracks, and then when in doubt, bring those hands just a little bit closer to your body.
Jim, you'd be a really good swim coach for Bruce Clayton and his chainsaw. I'm just saying, shout out to Bruce Clayton.
Yep, exactly right. Well, I was taught by somebody in Alaska, and he was classic Alaska. He was a bush pilot and a swim instructor, swim coach, and he also was a pistol instructor. And he always told us, he goes, listen, when you're loading your pistol, you don't load your pistol with your hands way out in front of you. You load your pistol with, the pistol and the bullets are close to your chest. And I was like, oh, that kind of makes sense. So, but that always stuck with me. So shout out to Stan, RIP Stan, actually. But yeah, that always stuck with me.
That's awesome. And we're going to think about some other cues for the indoor cats that live in the Boston area, like myself, who have not actually started a chainsaw before, ways to make sure that you're doing your train checks. Okay, next one here. So we talk about head position a lot, and our favorite cue here is quiet head. So it's very common for people to sort of lift their heads up out of the water, or their head is moving around a lot, or sometimes their chin is even too close to your chest. But in general, you want your head to be very, very still. And when you go to take your breath, you don't have to bring your whole face out of the water. It's very common for people to like lift their face up and diagonally towards, I don't even know where they're looking, but it's not the right place to be because you need to just kind of peek out to the side enough to get your breath of air. So one way to think about this is it should only be one goggle that actually breaks the surface of the water, and there's minimal movement going on. And it's important because head position basically determines the entire rest of your stroke. Your head is connected to your spine or your neck, and it's all kind of moving down. So if you can get that head to be really, really quiet and subtle, I think that can help.
Yeah, I always say the quiet head is the ibuprofen of swimming. It solves lots of problems. So you can walk up and see a swimmer and go, oh, I see 5 things wrong. But if you get the head correctly and get it quiet, then you maybe correct like 3 out of those other problems. So that's a place we start with a lot. And the thing that I've been talking a lot about with swimmers recently is to help with the quiet head is to really do the full exhale through your nose under the water, because then when you go to get that breath, you only need just a corner of your mouth to that air will come rushing into the corner of your mouth. So you don't need to rotate and get your full both eyes out and your mouth out, because that's just people who are generally don't breathe out, and what they're doing is they're turning and they're still breathing out air when they're looking, their head's looking up towards the top of the pool, and they're actively breathing in. Where if you actively breathe everything out while your head is under the water, then when you just go to just slightly get that mouth out of the water, like the air just comes rushing in. So super important.
Definitely. So next one here, something that we see really common is people who have very flat hips in the water, so they're not rotating that much. And a little known fact about swimming, people are like, oh, there's so much arms, it's an arm thing. It's really mostly a hip thing. So you're getting a lot of your power in the swim from this hip drive. And what that means is that your hips really, really need to rotate. So I think about trying to rotate my hips to be almost perpendicular kind of to where you started. So you're doing like a 90-degree turn on each side, and then they're parallel to the wall on either side of the pool. So one way to think about that is like if you could draw a sort of straight line from your head all the way down to the bottom of your body and then rotate on that axis. Like think of those meat spits that like turn around. You can see them. It's like roasting some meat. You want to turn just like that. And as you turn, you're going to be able to just drive so much power from your hips. I find it's helpful to do this also with a pull buoy and paddles because there you don't have to worry about your hips sinking so much and you can really, really exaggerate the rotation side to side.
A lot of folks have heard me talk about Lawrence Van Lingam, who is a run guru out of Boulder. And I was like, for example, he's Taylor Nibbs, run coach. But anyway, he has a lot about hip extension and moving your hips and your shoulders. And so I follow him mostly because I want to be a better runner, but I also want to be a better swimmer. And because swimming and running actually have a lot of similarities. And if you can sort of get this idea of moving your hips and this rhythm and flow, it's really going to help both your running and your swimming.
And you're dancing too, you know?
Yes, exactly. That's it. Which is most important, really. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We're dance coaches on the side. That's our side hustle. Okay, next one here is we see a lot of people have issues with kick timing. Many people come into triathlon swimming with different types of kicking. Like a lot of people are used to sort of the standard swimmer 6-beat kick. Others don't really have a good kick setup, and we might push them straight into learning 2-beat kicking. I don't know that I'm the best person to talk about kick timing other than the fact that I could not do it right until I switched to 2-beat kicking. And 2-beat kicking is a lot more efficient for open water swimmers. If you look at any triathlon pros, they are all doing 2-beat type stuff. So we're going to drop a link in the show notes for what 2-beat kicking is and what it looks like. It's basically just taking one sort of flick type kick per arm stroke. And I find that nailing your kick timing can be helpful to kick with fins. So if you put on fins, you're going to have a little bit more buoyancy going forward and your kick is a lot more powerful. So that's my best advice for kick timing.
Yeah, kick timing it's really, I find from a coaching perspective, it's really hard for me from the pool deck to talk about kick timing. And it is one of the things you just kind of have to feel. When you get it right, you're like, oh, there it is. And there's a couple of different ways to think about kick timing. So again, we'll put the video links in there. I tend to think about the kick and my arm on the same side, but also we have a drill called fiddle faddle, which actually emphasizes your catch and your kick on the opposite side. So you may find that the opposite side is better for you as opposed to the same side, but you'll eventually find one where like, okay, that makes sense and you'll get it. But yeah, it is a hard thing to explain. And it's really, really, really hard to coach from the pool deck.
Yeah, and I love fiddle faddle. Can I just say, one of my favorite tech swims, I will just do like 1,000 worth of fiddle faddle. It's so great. And then I give it to practice, and they're like, this was weird at first, and then I loved it. So we are team fiddle faddle all the way. Get your fins. If you don't have them, we will put a link in the show notes.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, fiddle faddle is, big shout out to fiddle faddle. It's awesome. And that's going to really, I think that's probably the best tool we have for 2-beat kicking. Do you think?
Yeah. Yeah. Totally agree. Yeah. Okay, next one here. This is my favorite. I think you brought this up. This was your idea, Jim, but this is my favorite cue to give people, which is soft, warm, kitty, and big dog. Can you please tell us exactly what that means?
Sure. Okay. So there's really two tensions in your arm when you are swimming. And if you think about sort of the 360, but anyway, when you come out of the full extension of your arm and lift your hand out of the water, your arm should be very soft tension. And when I say soft tension, I say things like pretend you were petting a little warm kitten, right? And so you have no tension in your hand, no tension in your forearm. So your entire recovery is just very warm kitty, soft kitty. There's no tension at all. And then when you enter in your fingertips first, then your wrist and your elbow, again, there's still no tension. Then you're letting those fingertips fall to the bottom of the pool. And when your fingertips are pointing to the bottom of the pool, then you introduce tension into your hand and your forearm and your wrist. And I call that tension, I call that big dog. So pretend that you're petting like a big black lab. And you're like, oh, big dog, right? So that big dog tension is there when your fingertips are pointed to the bottom of the pool. And then you're going to use that same tension all the way until you exit out back through your hip. And so if you think about the swim stroke, like 360, about 220 degrees of your swim stroke really is this warm kitty, soft kitty. It truly is recovery. There's a lot of recovery time in swimming, and your body only needs like a fraction of a second to recover. So super important to have those two tensions in your arm.
Yeah, I love this so much. And I will say, if you can combine soft kitty, warm kitty, and big dog with hip rotation, you will be so powerful in the water.
Mm-hmm.
Like those two things together, I think really dictate whether you have a powerful swim stroke or not. And power is speed. So put those together, put all the things together that we've talked about, and you will be absolutely fine.
Yep. And one thing I've been teaching more recently is just entering deeper in your swim stroke, just reaching like a foot below the water. And I feel like a lot of the way swimming is coached now is that you enter in the water sort of towards the top of the water, and you have to let those fingertips just sort of gently fall down to point to the bottom of the pool. And I think that's a very advanced move for many ways. It involves your scapula, it involves internal rotation of your shoulder. There's a lot going on. And what I have found for most triathletes who have not been swimmers, say, for example, in middle school or high school, is to sort of just as you enter and extend to about a foot under the water. And that just limits the time you need to sort of let your fingertips just sort of gently fall to the bottom of the pool. And you're just reducing that time. And then you're almost at the point where you just internally rotational just a little bit and your fingertips are suddenly at the bottom of the pool. And then you're ready for that pull.
All right, last one here, last spoken word swim tip. A cue that we talk about is armpit to the sky. So something that we often see is people just not really reaching high enough as they go to take the swim stroke. So basically, if I'm standing on the pool deck as a coach, I should be able to see your armpit when you go to take that stroke. So just really think about reaching. This is also related to having like a high elbow. So again, if you're sort of windmilling your arms, often you're not actually reaching high enough, but bring that elbow directly to the sky, really feel the entire side body stretch, and you'll be ready to take that big dog pull and that big soft warm kitty.
And what I was told with somebody was they say, think about like if I took like a smiley face under my armpit. When I'm standing on the side of the pool, I should be able to see that smiley face on your armpit when I'm standing on the side of the pool.
That's awesome. Great. We would say one thing to close here. So it is helpful to grab a swim snorkel. We put a link in the show notes for this, but this is the best way to be able to actually watch your stroke as you're going. Because if you're busy trying to breathe, your head's moving all over the place, you're probably not actually looking at where your arms are. But if you have that quiet head and you're just focusing on keeping your head still, you can see exactly what your hands are doing under the water, which will allow you to kind of tap into like, am I doing a good big dog? Am I doing my train tracks? All of that is helpful when you can actually see it.
Yeah, buy a swim snorkel. They don't cost much money. I will say, if you're new to swim snorkels, you might want to buy a nose plug as well too, because sometimes it takes it a little bit to learn how to do this. But it's it's like $20 and it's so well worth it. And it just makes swimming also just a lot less stressful. So you'll see your stroke and you can relax a little bit. Something we didn't talk about is sculling. And I like to do a bunch of sculling. I want to do my warm up because that's or breaststroke, but that tends to help me feel the water on my hands and on my forearms. And so sculling with a swim snorkel is fantastic. So I always, in my warm-ups, I always put my swim snorkel on and do sculling with it.
Fantastic. And we'll drop a video. We have a lot of videos, but we'll put a video for sculling, if you don't know what that is, into the show notes. Listeners, you might have thought we were done talking about swimming, but we have some more swimming related insights. Jim, why don't you take it away with your next two?
Yeah, so I've had a couple of new athletes who have unfortunately bought into one of the biggest myths in triathlon. And that myth goes, the swim is such a small part of my race day time-wise, so I don't need to swim much. I don't need to spend much time doing it. I'm like, and I get it because there is some level of logic to that. I say, okay, well, it's maybe 10% of my day or whatever it is. But it really does not reflect the reality of the sport of triathlon and of human physiology. So there's a few reasons to be swim fit. First one is that swimming is, as we all know, is very metabolically challenging. What do I mean by that? Go swim 3,000, 4,000 yards and tell me how hungry you are at the end. You're starving at the end, right? So that's the way a lot of people are starting, their Ironman, even just a Olympic or a half Ironman. It's a long swim, right? So very metabolically challenging and then really globally demanding on your nervous system. So again, think about that deep hunger, think about that tiredness after a big hard swim workout. That's how you're starting your race. So if you feel that way, if you haven't swum much and you don't swim like that, that's how you're starting, and it's actually going to drag down your bike watts and your run pace. So maybe you started doing this thing, I'm going to focus on my biking and my running, but you didn't realize that it was all going to get dragged down. And you get really surprised on race day because like, wait, I could bike X watts and I could run this on my bricks on the weekends. And then it turns out that you really can't because the metabolic cost of the swim. So that's one of the reasons. The way I like to think about it is that you imagine you have this bucket full of energy and you want to sort of meter out how much energy you pour out for each event. So in other words, you want to dump out just a little bit of the energy in the swim, again, because it's only a small portion of it. So you want to just dump out a little bit of it, but then you want to dump out a bunch of it on the bike. And I say that when you arrive back in T2, that you want to still have half that bucket full for the run, because the run is super, super demanding. Even if it's a sprint, it's still very demanding. So you want to be able to dump all that remaining energy into the run, maybe about 50% of that. So if you are not swim fit, you're probably going to dump out a third of your energy of the bucket right away. And so then you're only left with, 60% of your bucket to do the longest, hardest parts, which is the bike and the run. So swim more. And, if you're not able to get to the pool regularly, which is quite common for a lot of athletes, I would say plan your swim sessions around finding a very easy swim pace to do your event distance. So practice pulling way back on effort and comfortably doing your swim distance. And so you're really not thinking about racing, you're really thinking about, energy conservation. So your swimming really becomes a little bit different of like, not like how fast can I do this, but like how little energy can I put into this, and how do I have this, stimulus control on race day when I'm really pumped up and everybody's, going really, really hard and I'm all excited. But, for you, if you haven't been swimming much, it's really important for you to pull way back and have practice pulling way back so that you're just completing the distance. And again, you're showing up in T1 with, maybe only 10% of your energy bucket dumped out.
Very nice. Okay, so I agree with almost everything you said there. I do want to add a little bit of nuance depending on the type of athlete that you are. So I think this 100% applies if you are not a strong swimmer or if you don't have a lot of experience with swimming. We need to figure out how to make the swim a not metabolically demanding event, and that is going to require a lot of time in the pool. That being said, I have some athletes who either have a background in swimming, so maybe they swim in high school or college, they're pretty good, and at baseline, the swim is not that metabolically demanding. That's where I'm actually not going to have them spend that much time in the pool because I think we have a better return on the investment for saying, hey, your swims are already fine. Like, let's get you in the pool once or twice a week, but you can get so much faster in your race because of the proportion of things in a race. Like what is the bike and what is the run? That's where I'm going to kind of channel the bike and run. And I'd say too, if you're dragging yourself to the pool 3 times a week and it sucks, know that over time you can sort of earn the right to swim less. So we've talked about kind of my progression as an athlete where there were a couple years where I was in the pool like 4 times a week, maybe 5 times a week, trying to get better and better and better at swimming. And now I will not get in the pool more than twice a week. You cannot make me do it. Like, I'm just not interested in doing it. You cannot make me swim more than 2,000 to 2,500 yards. But it's okay because I'm a lot faster than I was when I was in the pool 4 times a week. And it's not that hard for me to be in the pool for whatever my goal events are later in the season. So I think about earning the right to be able to do that and getting to a point where the swim is not that metabolically demanding. But at that point, you actually can swim a little bit less and you can be more strategic with like, okay, if I want the fastest triathlon ever, as long as the swim is not that demanding, then I can improve on my bike and my run.
Yeah, and this sort of gets to one of my next points in my advice, which was this is talking about swim strokes. But anyway, one of the things I talked about here was that, go through a swim block where we go 5 times a week, right? And if you do that, if you can find a time, and it's probably not right now, it's springtime and you need to be doing some biking and running, but, plan next winter to say, okay, I'm going to do a swim block and I am going to go 4 to 5 times a week and you're going to get a lot better and you're going to be able to leverage that experience. Like you say, Katie, like you now can go for 2 times a week and you're fine, right? So yeah, I really encourage making that investment at some point in your swimming, and it does make you a much more confident triathlete. And it's kind of fun. It's kind of fun to do a block where you're just like focusing on one sport, and it's fun just to kind of feel like maybe you might go from like I don't feel like great in the water to be like, hey, I'm kind of confident in the water, and I don't know, I find it's a real confidence booster.
Yeah, this actually reminds me of a sort of an athlete case study from recently. So I have one athlete who has a bunch of Olympic distance tries coming up in the summer, and she bike commutes basically every day to work. She's probably riding 45 minutes or so every single day, which is incredible base aerobic fitness. We spent, I think, 2 or 3 months this winter where I was only giving her programmed swim workouts because, we knew she could build up the run later when she was ready to do it. And it's not that fun to run when it's, winter and not that fun. She was already getting a ton of base work on the bike, and then she just swam a bunch. And now that we're kind of incorporating swim, bike, run, and strength into her plan, she's only swimming once or twice a week, but she is such a better swimmer than she was before. So thinking about kind of periods of life, like in the winter, there's not that much to do. You might as well do an activity inside. But now that she can run outside and do structured bike workouts outside, she's super excited about it. So know that that's an option. You don't always have to be training all 4 sports. And even in an off season, I could see a world in which you're swimming 3 or 4 times a week and all of it is easy technique.
Yeah, that's a great strategy. Yeah, let's consider that for a lot of folks for next year. So following up on that, I've had a number of athletes who've said to me, you can tell a number of people are getting back in the pool now. And so a lot of people are saying, hey, I'm counting my swim strokes and my swim strokes are X and whatever that number is, right? And people will say like, how do I improve my swim strokes? And often what I'll say to them is, let's not focus a lot on, on how many swim strokes you're taking per 25, unless it's like just some crazy, unless you're like, doing 30 strokes to go 25 yards. And okay, there may be a problem there, but there are many ways to improve your swim speed, and turnover is probably not in the top 3. So sort of my advice for folks is, yeah, get in more often, get more comfortable with the water. Just this whole thing about swim conditioning, upper body aerobic fitness, that just takes a lot of time and it's very specific to swimming. I've had some athletes say, hey, I'm not swimming that fast yet, so I need to go to the gym more. I'm like, no, you don't. No. You're going to go to the pool more. So you just cannot get swim fitness really from anything else besides swimming. So my advice, swim more. This is back to the whole thing about maybe 5 times a week sometimes. Also, we talked about this before, focusing on a quiet head. That's probably your biggest return as well. Focus on engagement in your glutes and your hamstrings. Think about swimming in a cylinder that presents less resistance to the water. And also, we've talked about this, focus on a deeper entry and extension about a foot under the water.
And I will say, I did have an athlete question recently about like going on vacation, not going to have access to pool for 2 weeks. What can I do to maintain my swim fitness during that time? And they were asking specifically about like, should they do stuff in the gym? I think my advice is just like go to the gym because it's good for all of your sports, but not because it's going to maintain swim fitness in the exact same way. Like, it's not like, oh, if I really, really, really work my lats, I'm going to get in the pool and be faster. But work your core because you need to be able to maintain a tight and taut core while you're in the water, as well as when you're running, as well as when you're biking. So if you don't have access to a pool, yes, you could go to the gym a little bit more, but I think it's not in order to be a faster swimmer. It's just because you have more free time, and that's a nice thing to do that will help you for your other sports.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's like, yeah, you're not going to get faster, but you're also maybe not get slower, right?
Yeah, exactly.
If you go to the gym. We have also put in, there is a very famous blog post. It's by Joel Filio. If you don't know who Joel is, you probably don't because he's very inside baseball here. But if you've ever watched the Olympics or any kind of ITU racing, Joel has probably trained 25% of those athletes. And he's been a professional triathlon coach for many, many years. Absolute top of the heap in terms of coaching. Anyway, he wrote something a number of years ago called The Top 20 Rules for Faster Triathlon Swimming. I probably read this blog post at least twice a year. It just really gets back to the basics. And so put a link here of 20, but I want to go with the first 6 rules and just going to quickly go through them. And as we talked about, his number one thing is that conditioning trumps drills. He says technique matters, but you need to be fit. And if you're fit, you can just swim faster. So there are no shortcuts. He says, go swim. Number 2 was traditional drills don't work. And I think we see this a lot with folks who get coached by folks who are swimmers. And we typically here at the Endurance Hive have a little bit more of a holistic approach to swimming and triathlon swimming in general. So we don't do a lot of traditional drills. And so Joel will agree with us here that that type of drills and the way most triathletes do them don't actually have any material effect on swimming technique. And that is my experience. Number 3 is we talked about swimming more often. Frequency is your friend. Number 4 is do longer main sets. And number 5, probably my favorite one is don't overthink it and don't underthink it. So be engaged, paying attention. We talk about this intention of the workout, but don't get paralyzed by analysis. And as we talked about here, number 6 one is increased swim fitness translates to the bike and run, as we've just discussed.
Yeah, I love that. I think one of the things that many athletes are most surprised to hear is that like each sport is not in a silo. So when you get faster at swimming, you are also getting faster at biking and running. And when you maybe do a run block, you're actually going to come back and probably be faster on the bike. When you do a bike block, it'll bring into the run. Obviously, it's not exactly the same, but building your aerobic engine works, and working the higher heart rate kind of cardiovascular systems, all of that works. So just think about it as like everything is training and everything is advancing you towards your goals, even though some of it's going to be a little bit more sport specific.
Exactly. And we talked about this a number of podcasts ago, which was we've had some athletes saying, hey, I've been swimming a lot more and I'm getting faster running. It's like, yes, you are, because swimming is incredibly globally demanding and it is going to make you a faster runner and a faster cyclist.
I love it. Okay, very last swimming related insight. Let's talk about foot cramps, Jim. We hear these a lot from our athletes.
Okay, so this is probably a couple of different reasons why you're getting cramps while you're swimming. First one is I just want to focus on hydration, electrolytes, make sure you're well hydrated. It's easy, to be working all day. We talk about this all the time. You're working all day. It's hard to remember to drink and be hydrated, but that's a lot of folks probably end up at the pool, dehydrated. Or if you get there, I just find that the pool is a place where you get dehydrated very quickly because it's really hot in there. It's really humid, so it's awful. So think about electrolytes. Number 2, we talked about here is that part of what happens with cramping is probably the nervous system just gets overwhelmed and you get cramps. And so again, back to conditioning, swim more, you'll probably have less foot cramps if you swim more. And also, it's not uncommon to stop getting cramps in the pool, but then you start and you go to the open water and you start getting cramps in open water, which is kind of scary. But you think about it like you're in open water, you're in a wetsuit, you're just in a little bit different body position and different muscle alignments. And that wetsuit is like causing a new stimulus. Therefore, you're susceptible to cramping. So again, that's what we talk about, having a swim buoy in the back so you can just grab onto it if you get cramps. So it is a little bit scary, but it does happen. It seems to happen more when you first start swimming outside. But again, conditioning and hydration will take care of a lot of that.
Yep. And I'm going to put a challenge of the week in here. This is not my official challenge of the week, but you should have a water bottle with electrolytes on the pool deck during your swim. It is so common that I'll coach a swim lesson and someone doesn't bring water with them. And I think it's because maybe we don't think we need it, but you are sweating so much in the water because it is so, so hot in there. I find, Jim, I mean, when we're on pool deck, I'm like, wow, I'm doing a workout just standing here, holding on. And so think about always having those electrolytes. And also, this is a little bit separate, but always have like an emergency gel in your swim bag. I have many athletes who are like, I had to cut this short because I didn't realize how hungry I was and I totally bonked. Have an emergency snack in case you need to just get something down, or you can put carbs in your bottle to have it kind of on that pool deck so you won't end up bonking in the water.
There's a very famous triathlon coach who I will not name, but he's a bit old school, and he always says you shouldn't have anything on the pool deck. You don't get to drink during your swim, and I 100% disagree with that. And if I go to a swim and I've forgotten my water bottle, like I won't even swim. It's just that bad. It's like it's that critical. And and yes, my swim bag also has a front pocket, and in that front pocket I have like 4 or 5 different gels in there as well.
There you go. Awesome. All right. Well, I think we are done on swimming. I'm coming back in. That was crazy. I can't believe we spent so much time on it. And I think it's enough that episode 73's main content and title might be about swimming. But let's close with one final insight. I want to hear about this TrainingPeaks See How I Stack Up feature. Jim, tell me what you've been learning about.
Oh, yeah. Okay, cool. So if you use TrainingPeaks mobile app, you'll see at the bottom is a thing called See How I Stack Up. And I'm pretty good at ignoring these things because we've talked a lot about good data, bad data, and how a lot of times, data or analytics is generated and it's not really that relevant. But this is kind of interesting because, so I've clicked on this a couple times and I've actually found it pretty interesting. And it's helped guide some of my training for myself. And it's a great tool in a case for being average, we think about this as a bell curve. And if you're in the middle of the bell curve in the 40th or 50th percentile, 60th percentile, like you're doing great. So this is not something that you're using to try to get to the 80th, 90th percentile, which I'll never be in any of these categories. And it's not really comparing, I guess it's comparing you to other TrainingPeaks users, which I think is kind of cool because you can filter by your age, your gender. And I filter by the last 90 days because I feel like the last 90 days is what's affecting my current performance the most. So I have been using it for biking and for running. And so for running, they give you this percentile that you're in for the 400 meter, 800 meter, 1 kilometer, 1 mile, 5K, 5 mile, 10 kilometer, 10 mile, half marathon, and marathon, 50K. Me personally, I am not running anything long right now, so I just completely ignore the 50K. I'm only focusing right now just basically on the 400 meter because I'm just coming back to running. And I also know that if I improve my 400 meter time, that's also going to have downstream effect, which is going to make probably my 1 mile faster, my 5 mile faster. So again, I'm not trying to become a big runner here this year, just getting back into running. But it's helped guide and show me like, okay, you're in the 20th percentile for 400 meters. Like, okay, well, if I improve up to maybe 40 percentile, like it probably means that I'll get faster at the 1 mile. And it's true, that's what's happening. So I've just been using this to guide some of my training, just to try to get myself, again, to be average, to be in that bell curve. And I'm doing the same thing with biking. And what I'm finding is that if for biking, it has 5-second power, 1 minute power, 5-minute power, 10-minute power, 20, 60, and 90. Typically, most triathletes are really good with 20-minute power, 60-minute power, 90-minute power. And again, when I say good, meaning like they're in the bell curve, they're doing just great, and they do great in triathlons. Triathletes tend to have a limiter typically on their 5-second power, 1-minute power, and 5-minute power. One, because we don't train it that much. We don't have to. We're meant to go long, right? And to be very consistent. But what I've been using it for, again, is my 5-second power has always been a big limiter for myself. My 1-minute power has been a very big limiter. So this year I thought, okay, I can see it in TrainingPeaks, and it's kind of just encouraged me to get a little bit better. So I've been working on my 5-second power and haven't started working on my 1-minute power yet. I'm still scared of that. But what I'm finding is that when I started, I was in the 19th percentile or less for my 5-second power. But over the last few weeks, I've actually gotten up into the 40th percentile. And at first I thought, oh my gosh, like I got to get it to like 70th percentile, 80th percentile. And then I realized, wait, no, like I went on a couple group rides recently where there were some big power bursts and I was able to stay with faster people. I was following them, so I wasn't initiating the power burst, but I was able to stay with the group or an individual. And I realized, okay, that's what I'm here for. My goals with this year is to like train with people or go on a group ride, the Wednesday Night Worlds ride, and stay with people. And so it just turns out that being in that 40th percentile is actually enough for me just to meet my goal, right? And this is great because this is average. I'm in the middle of the bell curve, but this is exactly where I need to be. So I just thought it's kind of cool because I think a lot of times I'm really focused on perfection or being the best. And I just realized like, no, being in the bell curve for a lot of these things, you're pretty well rounded athlete. You could show up at a group ride, you could show up at a race, and you're going to be just fine. So this is a call to be average, to be in the middle of the percentile of the bell curve.
This is awesome. And I think what's cool about it too is if you think about 5-second power, like you can try that on every single ride that you do ever. A single effort at 5-second power, even if it's a zone 2 ride, like it's fine. It's not going to trash you so much. It's like less than a hill stride, basically.
Yes.
So I like that you might have just, I personally don't think I've ever said like, how much power can I generate for 5 seconds? Maybe once or twice or in a QOM attempt, but that is such a short time that I think it's cool to just mix in new things. Then maybe another day when you have a little bit more stamina, you try that 1 minute, you try that 5 minute. But I imagine like having something to chase like that that's new and different of just like, I want to be at the 50th percentile could be really, really fun.
Yeah, it's been great. It's funny. I started kicking around with it and I thought, this would be kind of interesting. And actually, you can filter by all time as well too. So I've done some, so I don't know, have over a decade or more of data in TrainingPeaks. So in some ways it's good and it's bad because I look back at my percentiles when I was younger. I was like, oh man, I was a lot faster. But again, it's all in context. Again, I look at it and go, what is my goal today, right? I don't want to compare myself to other people. I don't want to compare myself to my old because I'm not going to get that fast again. And that's okay. I just want to go out and ride with people and be able to keep up. And it just turns out like being in the middle of the bell curve is going to get me there. It's going to get me to my goals.
Very cool. And I would say too, like check this out and see if it makes you feel good. If it makes you feel shitty about yourself, probably don't do it. And we have to be really careful whenever it comes to this comparisons type stuff. Like I've talked about how I don't love Strava's features of like, what were you doing a year ago or 2 years ago? Because I'm sometimes like, wow, like I was really swim fit then and I'm not right now or whatever that is. Or, maybe I'm like, oh, I actually can see that I'm better today than I was in the past. But just be in tune with how it's making you feel. If it's motivating, it's amazing. You should totally do it. If it makes you feel worse about your performance or kind of changes your perceptions of your own performance, then I would say toss it out. Not going to be useful for us.
Yeah, I feel like a little bit like social media. We talk about that a lot, and there's always comparison, and sometimes a lot of times it makes you feel bad. But there are parts of social media where like it inspires me. I see people doing cool things, and I'm like, that's really cool. Like good for them, and boy, wouldn't it be fun to go do that same thing? So it's a tool. Be careful with it. If it helps you, great. If it doesn't, throw it away.
All right. Well, I think we have some other stuff that we're going to get to, but we have somehow filled this episode talking about swimming. So I think let's jump into, we have a single listener question, a challenge of the week, and a gear pick of the week. The question this week is, why does high heart rate on runs feel pretty easy, but so much harder on the bike? So for example, 160 heart rate for many people on a run might feel in control, where if you're at 160 on the trainer, it feels like you're maxing out. Jim, do you have initial thoughts on this question?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think a lot of it comes down to just the mechanical load, and running is just, has so much higher mechanical load on your body. And so therefore your heart rate's just going to be higher. It's easier to get a higher heart rate when you're running because you're just working so hard. And then the bike, if I did a 160 on my run, I'd be like, I'm kind of working. But if I did 160 on my bike, I'm like, oh, I'm really working hard. So for me personally, there's about a 10 beat difference between sort of thresholds. So if I'm doing, let's say like 145 is a high zone 2 run for me, I should be like 135 would be sort of a zone 2 for me in biking. So, but I think it's mechanical. But do you have other ideas?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And I think a lot of it comes down to like running actually is a very much full body thing. So you're pumping your arms and you're doing core stability to stay upright. Whereas on the bike is doing some work in the fact that you're sitting on it. And so you really just have to be focusing on your legs. And therefore it's just not the same type of total body stimulus. And that's why I think if we think about Nordic skiing, for example, that is like as full body as it gets. And for me, at least, I'm not very efficient at doing it, even though I really enjoy it. And as a result, my heart rate is like through the roof, super, super high. And actually, it might feel sustainable, but it's like, oh, wow, we're looking down. We're at 165 heart rate right now, where if I were doing that on a bike, I'd be done. Like I would be in a power test kind of towards the end of that and ready to stop.
Yep, for sure.
All right, challenge of the week. My challenge is make a new playlist to get yourself pumped for your next long workout. I find that if you're really dreading getting out the door, let's say it's for like a long run or something, if you can have a playlist that you look forward to, that can actually make it really, really fun. And if you want to, you can delay putting that on until like, let's say you get your first half of your run done, it's no music, and then you put it on as a little carrot. Or, if you don't want to punish yourself, you could just listen to it the entire time, but having a new playlist can be really fun to do that.
So is a playlist like a mixtape?
It's like, so you burn it onto a disc. Oh no, that's actually the CD. Never mind. But yes, glad we're up to speed. You can do it on this amazing app called Spotify. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it is related to the podcast on the back end.
So it's like an 8-track. Is that what you're saying?
I don't know what that is at all.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's way back.
Okay. All right. Yeah. All right, Jim, what's your challenge of the week?
My challenge of the week, I alluded to before, but for zone 2, easy stuff, recovery, just go on a ride or run where you try to hear as many sounds as you can. Or I like to think about birds. I try to hear, how many birds can I hear today? Or sometimes I'll go out and it's like, oh, how many things can I smell? Can I smell the roses or the manure in the field, whatever it may be? But I just find it's a great recovery run tool, and it just gets my mind it gets me out of my head of like when my heart rate and my breathing, this and that. So I just start focus on something else that really helps me with Recovery Zone 2 run.
This is funny because it very much applies to like rural life where there's not a lot of sounds. I'm thinking about my run this morning, which was along the Esplanade next to Storrow Drive. And I was like, please, I need to put on my noise canceling headphones and tune out everything that's around me right now because there was way too many sounds. But I don't know, you can try to discern like, where is the siren coming from outside of all the traffic? And like, where's the person screaming and who knows what's going on? So may or may not be giving this a try.
Right. Yeah. How many different car alarms can I hear? Right.
Exactly. All right, gear pick of the week. The weather is getting slightly warmer. It is also sometimes raining, and therefore the conditions for chafing are upon us. So I am recommending Tri-Slide. I don't know if I've recommended it before or not, but it's my favorite sort of like lubricant spray for avoiding chafing. You can use it for if your heart rate strap chafes, if your wetsuit is hard to get on. It's also useful for that type of thing, but it comes in a little canister, and it is my go-to for all anti-chafe.
My gear for the week may just be my problem, but I'm just not that good sometimes at cleaning my water bottles. And I found the solution for it, which is you buy this Hydro Flask bottle brush, which is really beefy. It's got a really long handle to it and a really beefy bristle to it. And so then it's just specific only for water bottles, and it will go way deep into your Hydro Flask. I'm embarrassed to say what was in my Hydro Flask. I just thought that was sort of permanent discoloration. Turns out it was not permanent discoloration, and the Hydro Flask bottle brush took care of that problem. But now I'm also more inclined to clean my Hydro Flask and my regular water bottles by having just a very beefy bottle brush that's only specific to this one thing.
Wow, your bottle brush is probably as beefy as your gut microbiome as a result of this Hydro Flask.
Yeah, exactly right. Or maybe that's why I've had this cough for 6 weeks. All right, yeah.
Exactly. All right. Well, this was really fun. Thanks so much for listening. As always, thanks for bearing with us on swimming. And if you want to hear more swimming, I mean, we know a lot about it. We just don't really love it that much, but it is an essential part of the triathlon. So we appreciate the support, the listenership as always. And yeah, if you're new here, please consider dropping us a rating or a review or sharing podcasts with somebody that you know.
Keep swimming, peeps.